Hey you, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about word counts in novels because my current novel does not have enough words. Every writer can relate to this, the quest for the higher word count. Whether you're stuck in a scene or you're trying to finish NaNoWriMo, which is starting November 1st, we're going to go over some tips and tricks for fleshing out your novel to increase your word count, which is exactly what I need to do, and you're going to do it with me. I'm author Nancy Basile, and I write murder mysteries. You can get one of my books for free using a link in the description below. First things first, how many words do you really need in your novel? Well, it depends on your genre and your current readers. I looked up the average number of words in novels by genre on kindlepreneur.com, which is a great website, by the way. And here's what they have listed. A fantasy novel has on average 109,000 words, horror 102,000, sci-fi 98,000, mysteries 91,000, and crime fiction 89,000. Now that's just a few of the genres they have listed. I write cozy mysteries, and generally those are around 75,000 words. But one of my favorite authors and kind of my hero, Tanya Kappas, writes cozy mysteries, and her books are around 50,000 words. And that's because her readers like a quick, fun read. So that's kind of how I modeled my cozy mysteries. Another reason my books tend to be short, and here's where I have trouble, I hate when characters go on and on and on about the same thing. I hate repetitive scenes. When I'm reading a book, I want to get the point and then move on. I don't want anyone beating a dead horse. You know what I mean? So when I'm writing, I make the point, I explain it a little bit, and then I move on. But what that tends to do is make my books shorter. So in rewrites, I have to go back and figure out a way I can give the reader more value without adding just junk words. So I've got some tips, and we are going to figure out how I can add more words to my book. Right now, I'm working on a crime novel called Bright Girl that is due out January 15th. So I need to step on it to make sure I publish that book on time. Let's go. Tip number 1, expand descriptions thoughtfully. So for instance, instead of saying the room was messy, you can give details that paint a more vivid picture. Was there trash on the floor? Were there leftover dirty dishes in bed? Piles of paper, overflowing laundry basket. Those kinds of details can inform the reader about the character who lives or owns that location, or about a workplace or some other setting. And by creating a vivid picture like that of a setting, you're also working on your world building. So I'm going to give better descriptions. Sorry, I'm writing. Better descriptions of some of the locations that my characters are visiting in my current book. The police station, which includes forensics. We haven't been there yet. A break room. We've also visited some of the suspects' homes. Some of them I described in more detail than others. I can go back and correct that. I can also do a better job describing what people look like. But remember, you don't want to get bogged down in description for only description's sake. It must inform the story or character development or something important that will be valuable to the reader. Otherwise, they're going to drop that sucker. Setting that a lot of authors forget that I try to remember to include is scent or smell. Think of your senses. What does something feel like, taste like, smell like? Including those in a scene can really trigger things or trigger emotions for readers. So use sensory details. All right, we are on our way. Okay, tip number 2, explore subplots. Now, Bright Girl initially didn't have really hardly any subplot at all because I wrote it for Amazon's Kindle Vella platform, which is a very quick, short storytelling platform. But now that I'm expanding it and turning it into a novel, I was able to add some subplots for secondary characters and for my main characters. Those can be emotional or actual story subplots. For my main character, I added more of an emotional subplot, and I showed some scenes with her and her family and those family dynamics. But I can expand that into one of the other main characters. So main character, emotional subplot. I also added a subplot for a couple of the secondary characters, giving them their own obstacles and challenges that leads them on their own story arc. That way I can kind of weave it into the main story. So subplots for secondary. For instance, if you want something, more specific to hang your hat on, one of my characters is a uniformed officer, and she looks up to the main character, who is a detective, and she's doing everything she can to soak up her knowledge. So we see her taking this journey of, being wet behind the ears and learning more and kind of coming into her own by the end of the book. And some of those subplots complement the main storyline of investigating the murder. So we've got those subplots working for us. We're cooking now. Tip number 3, develop your character's inner monologue. I have a lot of trouble with this, partly because I tell my stories from the third person point of view, not the first person POV. So for third person, it's slightly different to go deep with their inner monologue. But I also have trouble with inner monologues because, again, I don't like characters who just wallow in the same thing page after page after page. It was one of the problems I had with The Only One Left. We kept going over the same ground. A lot of romances fall into that trap too. I get that your character has insecurities and needs, but there has to be a journey there. You can't just stay in the same spot spinning your wheels. So my inner monologues need to move the story along. And the style that I'm writing in for this book doesn't really lend itself well to wallowing in emotions. So my inner monologue really needs to cook. But here's another place, like I said, that you don't want to overdo those inner monologues, because you don't want to get your characters bogged down in their thoughts. People read books for things to happen. It's also more difficult when you're telling the story from only one character's point of view, which is the case in Bright Girl. But I will revisit this. This will probably be the least way that I add words to my novel. All right. Tip number 4 is a classic write. Show, don't tell. What does that mean if you're a new author? Well, instead of saying Sarah was scared, you show us how she was scared. Was she biting her nails? Was she trembling? Was she pulling at the frayed threads of her sleeve? Was she subtly taking steps away from someone because she was scared of them? You need to paint a better picture rather than just she was scared, or whatever you're using, so that the reader gets a vivid idea of what's really happening. Because everyone shows emotion differently. So one person might freeze when they're scared, and another might take off running, fight or flight. And that will inform the kind of character that you're writing about. Show, don't tell. When can I do that? Well, I have some dialogue scenes where I can do a little more of that. And I have some action scenes, actually, where I think I could show more of what was happening inside someone than just describing it. So far, I think my best options for adding words to my novel are better descriptions and the subplots. All right. Next. The next tip is a good one for me. Rethink short scenes. How do you know how long your scene or chapter is? I usually copy the scene or chapter and then paste it into a word counter so I have an idea. I generally try to write chapters that are between 1,000 and 1,500 words. I've found that the books that I like that really move along, those are generally the number counts for their chapters. But if I'm running short on a scene, how can I flesh it out? Let's see. Maybe some of my brief exchanges could be more meaningful and add to those subplots in the dialogue. More meaningful dialogue. I could revisit the context of a scene just in case somebody's getting lost. That does happen in crime fiction. Revisit context. And in those short scenes, we can go back to those sensory details. What are they feeling, tasting, sensing? That will make those descriptions longer in those short scenes. But again, don't add words just for words' sake. Make sure it's informing part of the story or the characters. So I'm going to check out my shorter scenes and see if I can make them longer. Tip number 6 is add more plot points. I actually did this when I moved my story from Vella into a full novel. I found more twists and turns that my detectives have to take in order to solve the case. And it actually worked out really well for me. I was able to add more red herrings, more clues, and put more obstacles in their path, creating more conflict, which is at the center of every story. One of the things I did is I used a tried and true trope where two detective partners end up going at it. And that fight ended up being great for character development. Not only was it an obstacle in their investigation, it was an obstacle in their partnership. One of those emotional subplots I was talking about. It really lent a lot to the book and it increased my word count. So I can go back and see what other plot points I can add in the investigation. One of the things I had to do was extend the timeline of my story. Initially, it took place over a few days, but now I'm finding ways to lengthen it into several days in order to accommodate all those new plot points and character developments. Last tip, tip number 7, add flashbacks and foreshadowing. Flashbacks are a great way to avoid an exposition dump. And what is an exposition dump? That's when you pick up a book and for the first several pages, you just get somebody's backstory. Nobody wants that. Flashbacks are a great way to provide character development or to move the story along. I did that in a few places to help tell the story of one of the main characters, but I think I should be able to do it in other places too. So I'm going to add a couple flashbacks where it will tell the reader a little bit about why the character's acting the way she is. And maybe flashbacks in form of dialogue, where the other characters are relaying memories they have of something. Again, to inform us what kind of character they are. Add in dialogue. As for foreshadowing, that's a little trickier. You don't want to be heavy-handed with that and give away your whole story just because you want to sneak a few clues in there as to what's going to happen in the end. But you can maybe add something subtle here and there. I'm going to skip the foreshadowing because mine is a crime investigation and I really don't want a lot of that. I'm ready to go back and look at my manuscript and see where I can add some words. Okay, this is past Nancy, looking at a few days of work, and look, I bumped up my word count, beefed it up, boosted it, however you want to say it. Future Nancy here. It worked. Following those tips and tricks helped me boost the word count in my novel. One of the biggest problems I have when it came to rewrites is that every time I opened my manuscript, I would be frozen with fear because I was afraid to read what I had already written. I was afraid it was terrible. I was afraid it was stupid. I was afraid I was missing things or there were plot holes. So it really made those rewrites difficult. But I found ways to get over my fears. And you can use this video to get over your writer fears too. I hope you found something helpful in this video to boost your word count in your book. And if you did, please give me a like and then subscribe so you get more writing advice just like this video. Thanks for watching. I sincerely appreciate you.